get through this.
Easy finish. I'm not a great lover of cat. That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Not me. That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Hello and welcome to Shadowboxing. Today my guest is Kevin Morgan, the mayor of Cottesloe, and he is running for the seat of Cottesloe, where Colin Barnett represents. Hi Kevin.
Hello.
How are you today?
Well, I'm going very well, thanks, Tibor.
That's good to hear. Colin Barnett got lots of pet names. Some people call him a dictator, like Pol Pot instead of Pol Pot. Someone says he's not a dictator, but he is an emperor. And you got a different definition for him. I think you call him as
A bully.
bully. That's an interesting one. These days, bullies are not really welcomed anywhere in the society. People are fighting against bullies in schools, at the workplace, in politics, and even on the internet. So, how's that can happen? We got the head of state in WA, and he's a bully.
Well, I believe it's quite an expedient way for politicians to get their own way. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be, I suppose, ridiculed as much as I would have hoped, but I have certainly experienced it in dealing with Colin Barnett over the last few years. I mean, we've had our dilemmas over the height issue on Cottesloe beachfront for quite a few years. And I suppose that's where I first recognised the trait, was when we were told, essentially, Colin said, give them 5 stories or you'll end up with worse. He became Premier and we've ended up with worse. I suppose from a distance I've observed James Price Point up in the Kimberleys, where the Indigenous locals were told either to accept these economic benefits for giving up your native title rights to the land around James Price Point, or otherwise we'll take it off you and compulsory acquire it for nothing. We've seen it more recently with the Barnett government's attempt to strip local communities of their local government independence.
So Colin Barnett is usually say my way or the highway.
And it's coupled with intimidation, saying either...
So that's the real bullying bit.
Yeah, it's the intimidation. It's the intimidation of offering a harsher outcome unless you accept the...
So sort of blackmailing
Yes,
victims, and if you don't like it, I can do worse than that.
That's right, and it's, I suppose, not the way I believe you ought to develop public policy. It should be a contest of ideas, thesis, antithesis, until you find the correct solution. But to simply use tactics such as that to bulldoze your way to the outcome you want is, I don't think, good for anyone.
Definitely not for the communities or not for democracy, by the sound of it.
It doesn't produce the right answers. It stops people from critiquing what's going forward, and it certainly is anathema to, I think, even core liberal values.
By the sound of it, yes. I not really want to call myself, Colin Barnett, a bully, but I think he behaves as an emperor. And the emperor has no clothes. You stand up and you are the one who is shouting from the community and giving the voice. The emperor has no clothes. Why do you say that, and why do you doing what you do?
When you are trying to have that dialogue with another level of government and trying to understand where they're coming from, my suspicions that they're rather devoid of substance on their side of the argument gets strongly aroused when you find that they're telling blatant porkies about what the real reasons are for why they're doing things. I mean, the fact that Mr. Barnett can go on television and say that Mr. Morgan is against any development on the beachfront is a simple example. He knows that I and the community want to have development on that beachfront. We've been pushing for development on that beachfront for the best part of 10 years. It's just that Mr. Barnett and his cronies want to have high-rise there, whereas we want low-rise. We all want development, but to turn around and try to put spin on it and say that we don't want any development is a blatant lie, and it goes on in so many respects that you realise that if people are too are apprehensive about putting forward why they're doing things, it sets your suspicions running as to why are they doing it then. And it's the same with the local government reforms that they're trying to push through.
Before we go into local government reforms and other issues, can you somehow, take us into the internal politics of Cottesloe or that electorate? How many communities Cottesloe represents in Parliament, and what's the internal dynamic of the politics of Cottesloe?
Well, Cottesloe, I suppose, is traditionally a very conservative seat, and that's not a bad thing. People want to take change slowly and make sure they get it right. The electorate itself comprises about 7 different communities. Not all of them have their local councils, ranging from North Fremantle up to Mount Claremont, with Claremont, Peppermint Grove, Mosman Park, Cottesloe, etc., and Swanbourne in between.
So this has got a very upper middle class background.
It has, and it's long established. Most of those communities have been developing over the past century. The Cottesloe electorate, by and large, has religiously voted in Liberal candidates.
Yeah, in the past 22 years, Colin Barnett holds the seat. No one thinks he can lose it ever. What do you think about that? If you're challenging, which you're doing now, what you declare to do, what's the chances you got? I mean, Colin Barnett is not just the Premier of WA, but he got the whole apparatus behind him, the Labour Party, and the money and the support. So how an individual who is still a Liberal inside, I think you are, but you are not member of the party anymore because you're against and you're running against Colin Barnett. You couldn't be the member of the party. So how do you see your chances?
Look, the chances depend upon whether people are willing to actually step out and do something to change what they don't like. Right throughout that electorate, people do recognise that over those 22 years, they've got very little for Cottesloe itself.
What has been promised for them?
Well, not a lot gets promised locally because with the party system, they don't necessarily promise anything locally, which is in some respects understandable given that you are entering state parliament for state issues. But even on simple things that have been promised, such a bicycle path along the railway line from Perth to Fremantle, now that's been promised for every election for 22 years. We've still yet to get it, and people are quite literally dying because of it. And that is, just highlights that, Mr. Barnett's been a senior member of government for the best part of those 22 years, and we haven't got something as simple as that. And I think the real cause of that is because the Liberals take us for granted because they know they can't lose the electorate. Labor know they can't win it, so they don't give us anything, hence we don't get anything from anyone.
But you believe that the Liberals can lose that chair?
Well, I do believe that the community has finally woken up, that if they do want to see change in the way they are governed, so that the public policies are formulated with a view as to how they impact on the health and well-being of communities, such as the 7 communities within that electorate, then they're going to have to change the way they vote. And by voting for an independent, they can ensure that they actually have a voice in Parliament, not just for the economic and environmental issues as are largely focused on by the major parties, but to go one step further and look at what the impact is on communities, on rural people and where they live. And I suppose what I hope to make people realise is that they need someone to represent them where they live, not necessarily where they work, or not necessarily in terms of their particular passions on the environment, etc., but to actually focus on what the impact's going to be in their surroundings of their houses, etc.
But on the other hand, Colin Barnett and his parliament currently saying, we are looking after the people of Perth. we would like to have super councils, and the super councils will work much effectively and much cheaper than the current councils. So he wants to sort of emerge these suburbs and cities and towns and reduce it into from 31 into something like 12. Why he's doing it? You're saying he's not looking after even his electorate. Why he's want to look after Perth with a low number of councils to be created?
Look, the state governments have long recognised that they really need to pay more attention to local government to better implement their policies at the local level. The shortcut is to just abolish the existing democracies and to replace them with something that basically is just an extension of their own state government. Robson is doing that bidding for them. Robson was giving terms of reference which told it the answer. The Robson report was told that the answer to finding these efficiencies that are supposedly being pursued is by reducing the number of councils. It was precluded from having any meaningful look at whether any of those efficiencies can be delivered by alternative means. And that's where it's gone horribly wrong, because even the Productivity Commission has recognised that it's not the number of councils that make a difference, it's the ability to coordinate between them that's important. And it's on that front that we're going to see a disaster on our hands in years to come. Mr Barnett is refusing to seek a mandate at the next election for what he's proposing to do to strip us of local government independence. Instead, he's going to basically duck the issue until after the election and then foist it upon us, which to me is so anti-democratic, it's woeful.
Thanks, Kevin. But don't go away, please. We're coming back with shadowboxing after the short break and more interview with Kevin Morgan.